Okay, welcome everybody. This is the special work session of the Burnsville City Council, and it's very informal, and we have some special guests with us tonight. We have one item on the work session, and that is the legislative agenda and the bonding priorities. I'm going to have our city manager tee this up and introduce our guests.
Absolutely, thank you, Madam Mayor. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to turn it over to Chief B.J. Junman. Chief has offered his expertise in the world of legislative relations and his past experience to do a bit more of it for us organizationally, and I'm very grateful for that. So, BJ, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. That might have been oversold, but happy to help out here, and happy to have our team from, or part of our team from Lockridge, Grindell now, and we're fortunate to work with them, and I've worked with them in a number of capacities. They're a very professional group with great standing at the Capitol, and both Ann and Cullen are here tonight, and I'm not going to stand in their way, but they're going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the lay of the land, and then talk a little bit about our draft legislative agenda, and I'll chime in where needed here, and then just looking to get feedback. And then process-wise, once we solidify that tonight with the council, we have invites out to our legislative delegation, our state legislative delegation, to come to the December work session to review our 2023 legislative agenda with our entire state legislative delegation. So, historical process.
Ann and Colin will be present at that work session as well?
Yep, Ann, Angie, and Colin will be here likely in December. So yeah, part of their team or most of their team will be here. So we're excited to have them here with our state delegation to go over our priorities. And that's always served us well in the past. And it's a great opportunity to get them to understand what our priorities are and ask for their help. So.
Thank you, Chief, and welcome Ann and Colin. It's always good to see you both.
Thank you,
Great
Mayor.
expectations, right?
I'm Colin Sheehan with Lockridge Grindell now, and thank you, Chief. And I'm just going to give a brief overview of what we saw happen a couple of weeks ago and what we can expect in the coming days and the next few months, and then Ann's going to dive into your legislative agenda. So after the election, there was great change, but also not a lot of change. Obviously, the Democrats swept control of the House, Senate, and the governor's office. The first time there's been a trifecta since 2012 for the 13-14 session. There are 71 new members of the legislature. That's 35% turnover, which is massive. Typically,
you guys have a lot of education.
A lot of education to do. Typically, I would say you see about 20 to 25% turnover, so this is 10% greater than that. The House stayed the same from a numerical perspective, with Democrats in control at 70 to 64. The Democrats traded a couple of seats up in the Iron Range for a couple of seats in the Metro, but the difference between Democrats and Republicans in terms of raw numbers stayed exactly the same. And in the Senate, the Senate Republicans went from a 34-33 majority to a 34-33 minority. So one seat flipped, and it went from Republican to Democrat. Obviously, here in Burnsville, with the re-election of Senator Port, Representative Berg, Hansen, and now after redistricting pieces of Representative Ryer and Senator Carlson, I think the city is in very good hands with Democrat control and having Democrats in leadership positions. I think the city is well positioned with their agenda and having a voice at the Capitol in the next couple of years. Leadership changes came in the Senate. Senator Dietzich from Minneapolis is the new majority leader. Senator Bobby Joe Champion is the new president of the Senate, also from Minneapolis. And Mark Johnson from East Grand Forks is the new minority leader. Majority Leader Jeremy Miller from Winona decided not to run for minority leader. He still serves, but gave up his leadership post. And in the House, Speaker Hortman obviously was reelected. Majority Leader Winkler did not run for reelection, so we have Jamie Long, who is also from Minneapolis, and Athena Hollins from St. Paul as the House Democrat whip. The chairs were announced last week. Senator Port is the chair of Housing. So we'll be in a good position there. Senator Carlson is the chair of the Elections Committee in the Senate. None of the House members got gavels, I don't believe. And We expect committee assignments and, possibly tomorrow, but more likely after Thanksgiving, first or second week of December, which will obviously help us start navigating who's on respective committees and who will be, hearing the bills that the city wants to try and advance this coming session. Session's going to start on January 3rd. It is a budget year post-election, and with 35% new members, things typically move pretty slowly. January is mostly an education month for new members to get their feet wet and try and understand the process and what each department does and what their committees do. I think in February and March, you're really going to see things speed up and start moving, but there is a little bit of time between now and the holidays, and certainly throughout the month of January, for us to sit down and meet the new members of the committees and hopefully get them educated on what the city needs and get that going on the path forward. The biggest news in the next 2 weeks, other than committee assignments, is going to be the budget forecast. I think you can expect that will be announced either next week after Thanksgiving or the following week, the second week of December. The general consensus is that it's going to be $9 to $12 billion surplus. I think, the February forecast, which the legislature at least builds their budget off of, will probably dwindle down a little bit, from this December forecast, only because I think everyone understands that inflation is an ongoing concern. But the reality is we're facing a multi-billion-dollar state budget surplus. And I think that's good news for a lot of communities, but Burnsville and the projects that they're working on. You're not going to see shutdown scenarios with the divided government. It's very unlikely that that is going to be part of the discussion like you typically have seen over the past few years. And the last thing I'll say as it relates to a bonding bill and any bonding initiatives you have, I think there's going to be a lot of hope that we can get a bonding bill done this year, but because the majorities are so close, you still need minority votes in both the House and the Senate. So it's not clear how that's going to play out, and I don't think we'll know that till middle or end of session. But while hopes are high that there won't be a government shutdown, I don't believe there will be, and that they'll be able to finish a budget on time. There's still a little skepticism, at least in my mind, about whether or not they're going to be able to find the votes to do a bonding bill, and that will play out over the course of the next few months. So with that, I will turn it over to Ann, and then we can take questions as you have them, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Really nice to be with all of you, and congrats to those of you who are on the ballot. So I know you're finally getting some sleep. We followed, of course, your local elections as well. So nice to see you, and nice to be working with you again. What a night that was, right? I mean, pretty much everybody at the Capitol, both sides of the aisle, every group called it wrong. I mean, I think we all thought the Senate would remain Republican, just kind of widely. That was a huge belief. So the House was much more up in the air. So, now we're starting to see things play out. And as Colin said, we're starting to understand the players. So as it relates to your agenda, and obviously you're going to decide what your agenda is, and then we're going to work on it. But what we understand, working with Manager Lindberg and with Chief Jungman and Hugo and Jen and others, we think you're queuing up these things for us, and I just wanted to talk about them a little bit. It was, the handout that you had with the meeting materials. And so, I think the landfill issue, of course, continues to be just a top item for us. The big question will the governor and the MPCA be ready to put money forward for it this year? So we're going to find that out fairly quickly when the rumor is the governor will put out a bonding list of recommendations. We're hearing that he's probably going to put out kind of his old recommendations. This really normally wouldn't be a bonding year. As Colin said, it's really up to the minorities. If we're going to have a bonding bill, we could see one in 23, one in 24, one in 23, and in 24. But remember, the landfill issue, that money isn't for Burnsville. It's for the MPCA.
Yeah.
And that would also sit in the bonding bill. That would come from the state agency request. And as we've been in communication, the MPCA has told us they're not yet ready to put the plea into the governor to include 160, 70, 80 million in climbing. And so we haven't heard anything different yet, but we are waiting for the elections to learn more about that. on bonding, we have all together, you and the council, we've encouraged that you ask for something for Burnsville, not just something for the state. And we've been honored to go through that process with Chief and Jen and the city manager and, help you think through some of the things you're looking at. And, we really think the Highway 13 and Nicollet intersection is ripe for bonding for many reasons. It makes many cases to legislators. It's very well developed by your staff. It scores really terribly by MnDOT. It's got both, transit and transportation components since people are trying to get to the transit facility. It's got equity arguments for the chairs that care about that. So we look forward to your decision on, working on that. The host community issue, we're getting new chairs there. Senator Pratt has just been a huge ally for us. He fought to keep the funding for that all the time. He's no longer the chair of that committee. So those committee chairs are new. We're gonna get in and meet with them and tell them why this is such a great program, why we need to keep it. We're doing the same thing in the governor's office. So we just need to educate people on why the host communities that benefit from that program need to continue to keep those dollars. We don't see in a time of a big surplus why there would be a threat there, but we need to make sure. I think another thing, and this is sort of a jump back to the landfill issue, but it's also the host community grant. We need to have the environment chairs understand these issues. Rick Hansen will return. He's the House Environment Chair, so he certainly understands the landfill issues down here. But we have a brand new environment chair in the Senate who kind of was a shocking chair announcement to me, to be totally honest. I mean, he's Senator Frentz from Mankato. He's really tight with the governor. So him understanding, they're both from Mankato. They've known each other for 30 years or whatever. Him understanding our landfill issues is going to be really important because he's the new chair of Energy, Utilities, and Environment.
Wow.
It's just a strange combination in the first place. So we really need to get Senator Frentz up to speed on all both the host and the landfill issues here in Burnsville. So, a lot there. I guess one other thing I'd add is, so many of you know the chairs in the bonding areas. So it's really important to continue those relationships. Remember, Fooley was the chair in the House. He remains and has been appointed the chair again. His staff member is still Jenny Nash. We've already been in communication with her about the project, so that's important. We expect the minority lead to remain Dean Erdahl, who understands Burnsville's needs as well, so that's really good for us. We're not starting from scratch in there. On the Senate side, it's gonna be a little different. It's Senator Sandy Pappas. She's represented St. Paul forever. And she has been a bonding chair in the past, but we've got to get her to understand for Senator Port and Senator Carlson why we need what we need in the bill. Colin can take a guess at who the Senate minority lead is in bonding. I'm not sure. I think there's a few names people are floating out there, but that person will become really critical to us too, because remember, those minority leads have to get the votes to get the bill across the finish line because they take super majorities. So we'll be spending a lot of time with those people, trying to get them to just, grow from what we already know or begin to educate them. The 71 new members, is a hill to climb for sure. Thankfully, your delegation is not new. There's new people to the city. But Representative Ryer, remember, she ran against Representative Mason internally, and then now she hasn't. We've already met with her. We've walked with her through your agenda with her, super willing to help, super eager to do what the city of Burnsville needs. And that's been the case with all of your legislators, so they stand ready to assist, and we look forward to working with you and having a discussion tonight on what you want to work on.
First, talk to us about the landfill, because it's this next legislative session that the Environmental Committee is going to address the bill for the dig-in hall. And that's what the MPCA is putting before them.
I think all of that is unknown, Madam Mayor and Council. I think if I couldn't speak for the MPCA, but I think how they look at that, they put a number in as big as they did. They were saying dig-in hall is an option. I don't think that's been ascertained for sure, that that's what we're gonna see the administration say it should be. But the fact that we all saw that they put that in as their number in the long-term plan shows a real commitment. Until you see it in a governor's rec, you're not really sure what that means, because the agency makes the proposal to the governor, who decides if they're gonna do that. I think that number is so big that I think most people think it has to be done through bonding.
Yeah.
It could be done in an environment committee if the environment chairs were giving that large of a target. They usually are not. If you look at the pie of the state, it's like
Yeah.
HHS and K-12 get like 85%. The environment committee is actually kind of a small number. They don't even get 180 million a year in their budget. So to see those chairs
So-
lift that kind of a thing, but they have to understand it and want it to happen, because it's really gonna kind of block out the sun for all dollars in landfill cleanups across the state. I think the last time they did a
Yeah.
chunk of money for the whole state was like
Yeah.
40,000 or 40 million,
Yeah.
so.
So the strategy then, from your point of view, is take it to the bonding bill and have it come out as part of the governor's proposal?
We want to try every path that's available, so we have to try all of those. I think we have to be realistic. If the governor isn't proposing it in '23, it's probably not going to happen. He has to have moved it into his priorities. And so, realistically, he's already, he's got a '23 bonding bill, potentially a '24, maybe a '25 and a '26, because he has a 4-year term. We need to pressure MPCA to get ready, because he doesn't need to put it into his recommendations until his own agency says, we're ready to go, let's spend the money. And they're not saying that yet. They're saying they're still doing preparation for the money.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I could just jump in there, and that's where the relationship with Lockridge is so important, because although we call it our legislative agenda, it's also our relationships and government relations with state, state agencies like the PCA, and Ann and Colin and their team helping us navigate those waters to make sure that we continue to be a priority at the PCA, and that
Yeah.
we find the best solution moving forward, and that we keep all our options open, whether that's bonding or operating funding. So that's really kind of what that top legislative priority is how do we make sure that, we get that landfill line appropriately, and obviously the council's priority has been the dig and haul option, if we can make that happen.
And this is the reason why we have to have a good relationship with Kirk Kudelka.
Right, and I just will say, Madam Mayor, member, thank you for doing that. I mean, I know some of you have put him through the paces. I've watched you do that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Keeley is smiling, and, he can take it. As you know, he's very good at what he's doing, and he's very good at not letting on.
Yeah.
He's that's his job, to not say, is more than, he can't get ahead of his boss, Governor Walz, but he does have a good relationship with you, and that really matters. I mean, I think
Yeah.
people feeling that they should have a hostile relationship with the agency
Yeah.
doesn't work well. You've invited him in the past
Yeah.
to present to you. I've watched those council meetings.
Yeah.
Not a bad idea to do that again. We could talk to him about when you might want to do that, but I think continuing to foster that relationship is very important for the city.
I have a good relationship with him because he calls me when there are things that's going on, and he gives me what they're doing. He lets me know. He called me, and he called me when I was in Egypt with regard to that they were going to release their statement about the certificate of need for waste management. So when they're ready to do something like that, and before they put it out, he has given me the courtesy and the respect of letting me know what's going on. So for me, it's always about nurturing that relationship, because it works to nurture that relationship, because they're open to listening and to understanding the direction. And it doesn't have to be contentious, but being honest and straightforward with what we want. So if there's anything, because the last time the mayors of MLC met with the governor, I was in that meeting, and at that time, this was last year, talked about the landfill. And he was aware of it, but the MPCA was still doing their work. So I think if there's a time where we need to meet with him and plead our case, I think that's something that I'm happy and willing to do again. And it doesn't have to be with the MLC mayors, if we're we try to get a meeting with them.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I can, I'll just kind of run through the agenda here and get any feedback you might have. And
Yeah,
so we talked, I think, extensively about the freeway landfill and dump.
Yeah.
I think everybody's well aware of the priorities there. The second one here is around the primary service areas. This is our EMS licensing. We're one of the few cities that are fortunate in the metro to own and operate our ambulance license. And we think that other local units of government should be able to determine who that is, whether they provide it themselves or someone else. Currently, it's not an ability of a local unit of government to decide that. It's whoever owned it in the early 80s still owns it today. So we're building a coalition through the Fire Chiefs Association to try and make some changes on that. So that's quite an uphill battle, and it's going to take quite a coalition to do. The third one here is more of a defensive.
can you
Go ahead.
stay with the primary service area?
Yep.
Chief, you've been working on this for a long time. What are some of the major obstacles? And, you know, and
Yeah.
what's a pathway forward?
That's a great question. I could talk all night about this. Really, we've been having a lot of conversations with the Ambulance Association, with the Regulatory Board. The Chiefs Association has a dedicated lobbyist to this issue. It's a bit of a David and Goliath operation, I would say, just because the large healthcare institutions in the state want to keep it as is. So continuing to build those relationships, I would tell you the League of Minnesota Cities has wholly adopted this policy and wants to see local control as well. So it's continuing to build those coalitions, the police chiefs, and, we'll be reaching out to other organizations that align with us on this and continue those conversations. And it might be one of those things where we take a piece of it at a time, right? Whether it's making sure that there's transparency, making sure that there's some performance standards, making sure, and just kind of chunking away at it. So,
So breaking it apart and chunking it,
Yep.
but knowing the end game.
Yep, it's going to be a multi-year, multifaceted approach. There's no easy answer because people are pretty entrenched in their opinions on this. And I would tell you things are coming to light as there's challenges with recruitment and retention on the ambulance world, that some of our neighbors are seeing some really challenging situations with their ambulance providers. So I think it's going to become very apparent that there needs to be changes relatively soon. So we'll continue to foster that relationship and continue to educate people, right? We have the right information on our side. We have the right stories. We have a good story to tell about the issue. And what we're not saying is that every city should operate their ambulance. What we're saying is that they should have some say in how their ambulance is provided. And there's a lot of good examples. We're fortunate that we have a fire-based ambulance service that works very well for Burnsville, but our neighbors at Apple Valley, Lakeville, and Farmington have a joint powers where they contract out there. So there's a lot of ways to do this, and we're not saying our way is the only way, but we're saying that you as elected officials get to set what the standards are in the city of Burnsville for fire, police, and EMS. You get to set the rates that are charged. You get to set policy around how aggressive we bill people. And unfortunately, not everybody in the state gets that opportunity. And really, that's what local control is about, is giving everybody the opportunity. And frankly, it helps us with the partnerships. As we've looked at fire districts, it opens the doors if people have the ability to be on the same playing field as we are. So it's kind of a long view. We know we're not going to get it accomplished in one session, but there was a legislative audit report that came out late February, early March of this year that pretty much validated a lot of the things we are saying in the local control discussion. So using that as kind of our tool to point to legislators, and I can tell you there's a lot of discussion at the legislature about that particular audit report. The legislative auditor was really clear that these are important recommendations and that the legislature needs to act on them. So I know it's a long answer, but there's a lot to it, and it's a complex situation where you can't just pull one string.
Yeah. So what's the first deliverable that you guys want us to achieve this legislative session if you're going to break it up and chunk it?
I would say we're still working through the details of that. I think it's too early to tell. Some of that was seeing who the chairs of the committees are and how things are getting structured. I got some information today that they might have a select committee just on EMS, and depending on who gets put on it, will help us determine what we think we can get accomplished. So we haven't publicly discussed kind of which pieces we want to go for first. So we're still working through some of those details of how we should address those things.
Mayor and Council, I would also add that BJ and I are incredibly committed to telling Burnsville's story
Yeah.
when it comes to our EMS service. I would repeat his point that really this item is about local control. And you all have maintained longstanding policy decisions that I believe are incredibly right for this community.
Yeah.
Frankly, I believe it's one of our single strongest competitive advantages. And we have a great story to tell. So I think that the first deliverable that you'll see from us on the staff side of things this year is really just being very clear about telling the great stories that we have, and highlighting our EMS service, not only from a legislative perspective and the help that it might offer there, but primarily as a matter of our brand, just purely telling our story. So we've already talked about what that might look like, and I do think that will dovetail nicely here. I think it's also a good reminder that with Ann and her team in our corner, we also have the benefit of following their lead and continuing to develop the relationships that you're talking about, Mayor, earlier, and also being very strategic about how we approach these priorities that you have in meaningful ways.
Yeah, well, Chief BJ, you have been working on this, how long? 5 years?
Yeah, probably close to 8 years.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, I know it's a long time, and you've been building those relationships, and you've been bringing them in one at a time, and, but, yeah. And I know the challenges that we have with the methodology that is, and system that's in place now, and how it affects us and our neighbors when we're challenged, when both ambulances are in service and they're out and not here.
Yep.
That's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a continued work in progress, and you'll see more updates from us as we get further along and we build that coalition. And just know this is a multi-year, multifaceted effort, and I don't necessarily have all the steps laid out yet, just because the election went a little different than I think everybody was thinking, and so it kind of changes the approach a little bit. So we're kind of retooling our strategy a bit. So.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's intentional, and you're looking, and you have some kind of strategy, whether you're breaking it up and chunking it and saying, okay, this year we're going to accomplish this, the next year we're going to accomplish this, and so getting to that end result.
And I think the city manager Lindbergh's point is, I think telling our story is an important piece of this.
Yeah.
Most people don't know what to expect from their ambulance provider. And I think just educating people on what we provide and the importance of it would be helpful, We interact with about 10% of the population per year. It's important that the other 90% know what's available to them.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
So yeah, that's EMS and primary service area. Like I said, I could talk about it all day. There's all kinds of details about it, but more to come. The third one down here is a bit of a defensive one on local control. And really, we want to make sure that we continue to have local control on things. There's a lot of things that we do and we have control over. But things like local option sales tax, franchise fees, maintaining our revenue tools, codes, all those kinds of things. And it seems like every year there's legislation that comes up to affect those things. So some of this is trying to get some of those things, and some of this is about defense. We want to make sure that you as an elected body still have the ability to make the decisions that are right for the city of Burnsville. So that's really what that third one is about. It allows us to react in a timely fashion to those items as they come up. If we turn over, supporting positions that we're working with, whether it's the league, Metro Cities, MLC, a bunch of our stakeholders on. You talked a little bit about it earlier, Ann talked about it. The Host Community Economic Development Grant Program is the first one, and then the aggregate mining fee are the two kind of supporting positions where those other organizations have positions on them, and we're definitely supporting that. If you remember, we used to have like a 20-page legislative agenda, and we've really boiled it down because we support what the league supports, we support what the fire and police chiefs have. You know, there's a bunch of us that are in trades associations, and we use some staff time to help support those, but these are really focused on the initiatives that are very important to Burnsville. So those are kind of our legislative initiatives. And then for the first time, we have a state bonding issue down here. So Ann and Colin talked a little bit about bonding.
Go back
Yep,
to
Mayor.
the host community.
Yep.
Is that vulnerable? Because it always seems like it's vulnerable every legislative session. Because you have to
I
fight
think
to
we
keep
just
it.
don't know because the new chairs have to be educated about it. I think the surplus makes it not vulnerable.
Okay.
It's hard to imagine Deed, who's been a strong advocate of keeping the fund, you know, they're gonna get to ask the governor for an increase, not have to cut internal to their budget.
Yeah.
But we do need to get into the new chairs and define the program for them because they won't know the history and they won't have had any experience with it.
So there were only two communities that were host communities, Burnsville and Inver Grove.
Yep.
Is there a third one coming in to play?
You know, we've heard that, but I've never really
heard it
seen
too,
that,
but
and I've
I-
been in touch with the Inver Grove folks
Yeah.
so that we can send the same messages to the chairs on that. One of the chairs remains the same, but I had mentioned Senator Pratt is no longer
Yeah.
the chair, and he's been a strong ally for Burnsville. Just, you know, he had a Shakopee and Prior Lake, and he understood the value of it to us, but we have a new chair now that we have to explain that to.
Yeah, because I was wondering if it's true that there's going to be a third host community, then what does that mean? Will it now be split into, that pot is split 3 ways rather than 2 ways?
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Council, I did spend some time tracking that down a little bit. I worked with Manager Lindberg on that, and we think we figured out where that came from. It's like, who's this mystery third city? It doesn't
Yeah.
really look like there's a mystery third city. It appears it came from Bond Council in a presentation, and I don't know which one it was, if it was like Baker Tilly or Ellers or, you know, Springs, I don't know who it was, but somebody was talking about there may be other landfills that become
Yeah.
eligible by definition. And I don't know what they were looking at, but there wasn't a certain city by name. And if that were to happen, we would ask them to increase the pot, not say, oh, now there's 3 cities or 4, so we each get less.
Yeah.
You gotta bump
Yeah.
the pot up, and then we'd ask our local legislators to put that bill in along with the Inver Grove legislators, and I think that would be a really easy case to make.
Yeah.
But we were not able to find another community. It appeared it came from, like I said, a bond council presentation internally that MMB was at, so they had kind of heard the rumor too, but they couldn't identify a community either. So, I mean, we could guess, you know,
Yeah.
what are the
Yeah,
next landfills
because
that are gonna close?
Is it,
I don't know.
are they trying to include communities outside of the metro? Is that where that comes
You
from?
know, I don't
Because
know.
I heard the same thing.
Yeah, I looked
read
at
it
the
someplace.
map. I mean, I was thinking, is it, you know, whatever it is that's out by New Prague or
Yeah.
Belle Plaine, but that's non-metro, so it's possible that's what somebody was thinking about. Again, the players have all changed now, so I don't know.
Okay, yeah, let's just make sure that if it's going to be a third, that the pot is increased so that it doesn't decrease the money that comes to us. 'Cause hate to see the money staying the same and now split 3 ways. Yeah,
And then the last thing at the bottom is the state bonding item. So staff had come up with a number of ideas, and Ann and Colin and their team helped us vet them. And really, we believe that the Highway 13 and Nicollet Avenue crossing it should be at the top of our list and probably is the most likely to be successful for a bonding project. And I would just call your attention to a nice one-page infographic that Jen and her team with Bolton and Mink came up with. So I'm a big fan of visuals. And so they knocked it out of the park with some basic bullet points there on the project need. Just under 43 million, gives us some grade separation to get safe crossing there. As you're aware of, we've had some unfortunate tragedies at 13 and Nicollet this year. And we think it's important from a safety perspective, an engineering perspective, and hit on it a little bit earlier. It doesn't have a great rating for an intersection from MnDOT, so we think that that this has a great case for state bonding to get done. So we would propose that we request the state bonding for that intersection to get that project across the finish line. So that'd be the first time that we're aware of that we'd be asking for bonding money, but a lot of communities do this, and like Ann and Cullen had said, we don't know if a bonding bill will happen in 23 or 24 or both or none, but we figure we should be at the table asking for that. And really the keys are getting to that introduced and then trying to get on the bonding tour where legislators will come out and see the bonding project and the proposal, and then lobbying for it at the Capitol. So our hope is that we could get that up in the final bonding bill, so.
Yeah.
Well, glad to see this 42.8 million was put in 2026 dollars based on inflation rates close to what we're seeing today.
It was done before we had the inflation rates we've been seeing.
Yeah.
Was this based on a 4% inflator?
I think it was 5.5.
Oh, that's better. Maybe we'll get there one day. The question for you, Ann or Cullen, are we going after the full funding for the bond, or do they expect locals to have a cost share in bonding proposals?
They do like, Madam Mayor and Council, they do like a local cost share. There's certainly bills that we've passed that have that requirement waived. I mean, we would go for that, obviously. I mean, this is a regional, very busy intersection. It's a trunk highway. It's the state's responsibility.
It's a state highway.
I think one of the things, and that's more in bonding, one of the things we also want to consider here, because again, the elections changed everything and changed nothing. The path could be different, and we have to think this through a little bit. So really, we're talking bonding, but it could be transportation funding, like, not a simple majority vote in a transportation budget bill, because that has to happen. There has to be a budget bill this year. You have to have a balanced budget. There could be possibly not a bonding bill, and why there could be a change here is historically, Senate Republicans and House Republicans have been much better about earmarking transportation projects. They like naming them and funding them. Democrats, these are broad stereotypes, obviously, but Democrats like to not do earmarks. They like to trust MnDOT to fund in order by merit what the projects are. So let's just give MnDOT the money, and then they'll fund you based on your project. We think both strategies work for you, because as your staff, you have a meritorious project here. So if Senator Dibble, who's the new transportation chair, who doesn't like earmarks, and Representative Hornstein, who's the transportation chair in the House, who doesn't like earmarks, you say, we're just giving all the money to MnDOT and they can fund things in order. This is a good one. So it kind of works either way. So we could be trying to get this in the transportation bill, and we would just pivot based on, what we think's happening and what we can do. I also think the governor is a little more open to earmarks, but now he doesn't have kind of that team on the field. And, in general, Senator Dibble's been very anti-earmarks, where Senator Newman was very pro. In fact, he called them constituent requests. And he said, I'm proudly for these things, and he wanted to name them. Related to that, Senator Newman did not agree to do the match from the state of Minnesota to release the federal transportation funding. For the same reason, he said, I'm not going to give you guys a green light to spend all this money that's coming in from the feds. Name the projects. And I'm not going to do a match till you name the projects, and session closed, and that never happened. We expect to see the Democrat chairs pass that match, which will release a lot of federal funding. And whether we get the money from the state or the fed, we don't care. Whether we get it from the transportation bill, the bonding bill, because we have a project that can make those arguments. I think one other nuance to think about that intersection, and something Cullen and I, we don't understand yet, we're trying to understand this. There's a new committee in the Minnesota House called the Sustainable Infrastructure Committee. It's chaired by Representative Cagle. She's from the Blaine-Coon Rapids area. We think that's a transportation committee, likely based on climate and equity issues. These are the arguments that we were working with the House to make before, and we've already started working with your staff on, like how we would talk about that intersection related to those parameters. It could be that it's some other form of sustainable infrastructure, but the Democrats have been saying they're really committed to climate, both in bonding and in transportation. You might have seen just recently Frank Hornstein Who was in Egypt? I think might
I
have been
know.
with you.
He was there with me, and so, yeah.
And he came back very committed that transportation will have a climate and equity component and a sustainable component. And Representative Cagle has been his vice chair on the Transportation Committee. She views him as a mentor, and she's been very strong in promoting her own community's Highway 65 project that runs through Blaine, and very interested in ways to capture equity and climate. So we think that's gonna be a new committee that's gonna look at those projects, but we don't know that. It's just on a list with a new committee name that Speaker Hortman has given. So that could be another path for us.
Well-
We just don't know.
Isn't Minnesota getting $7.5 billion from IIJA?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
the
over
pathway of
5
how the-
years, and it required a
Yeah.
state match, and that is not, the state match did not take place last year. So that the legislature must, and they had quite a debate in public, you
Yeah.
know, about do we have to appropriate, and at that time, MnDOT Commissioner Margaret Anderson Kelleher testified, we must have a legislative appropriation to have these funds, and that didn't take place. So that's why we think it's gonna happen this year, and then that money you're talking about can start flowing. It's over 5 years.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was part of my follow-up question is, given the north of 9 billion surplus, you know, we've been thinking of this in terms of a bonding request because we really weren't, historically, we weren't dealing with 9 billion in a state surplus. Is this project potentially something that could be funding outside of a bonding request just because of the amount of money that will flow to MnDOT, and if it scores high enough?
Yeah, for sure, because it can be cash or in the Transportation Committee, or maybe the new Aaron Cagle Committee. And Cullen, you know, knows well that often like when he was chief of staff, in the Senate Republican, like both caucuses try this, you know, getting a supermajority vote is tricky, because you gotta get the other team. But if you do a simple appropriation, cash, you don't need the other team. So with a surplus, you could see maybe Democrats, and I think Republicans would have done the same thing. And in fact, we're talking about it. You know, let's just put cash in a whole bunch of projects and just fund them straight up. So that might be something they could do early, you know, there's just lots of paths, and until they start setting targets and convening, and January will be just orientations, and, you know, the 71 new members will listen, and all the other senior members will leave. But, you know, so we have plenty of time, we just have to see what they're gonna start doing, we just don't know, but absolutely it could be a straight up cash bill, it could be a transportation finance bill, or bonding. We just wanna be ready.
Back to the landfill, since we're on the funding discussion. We really want the landfill remediated. I would call it dig and short haul. We want it short hauled over to BSLI. We don't need it to go outside the area and add transportation costs. But we also don't really want it using bonding funds because it'll moratorium any development for, 37 and a half years or something like that. So given this this Powerball win of 9 billion plus for the state, you know, is there any feasibility in this next cycle that the landfill could have some funding coming from that 9 billion plus for funding the MPCA if during the session they come forward with their ability to be ready, which I think has got too many complications associated with it to get done in any kind of short-term near period of time, but they have to work those out. But is it feasible that that money could be cash as opposed to bonding that restricts redevelopment?
I don't know if they even have a pathway forward with how that money is going to be deployed, distributed.
Yeah, I mean, that is a possibility.
Yeah.
You technically could do that.
We would prefer
You
that,
would
because we really
For sure,
don't
because you
want
don't have all these strings,
We
and you
don't
don't
want
have to wait.
to wait
And that would
nearly
be
40
great.
years to do anything with it, right?
The appropriations bonds process, which is how we had Senator Port, as you recall, and Representative Mason is how they put the bill in, and that was to kind of achieve the same thing, but it made the bond more expensive.
Yeah.
So there is a way there, but you're talking straight up cash. In Colin, you know, maybe he has a different view on this. I have been there, as has Colin, with these huge surpluses. I have been there at the trifecta. I think expectations are very high right now and very unrealistic, because what's happening is, we're seeing this all over, is it's sort of like there's a sign that says, get free money here, and people are rushing to the Capitol, so there's way more hands out than there were before. People know, Democrats as a group are more willing to both tax and spend, so it's more opportunity. And then you've got a surplus on top of it, which even that's mostly one-time money.
Yeah.
And could change, especially if there's an international recession and inflation, et cetera. But right now, I think we're seeing the honeymoon too, that, we've been part of the trifectas with Republicans and Democrats both. It's like, this is just great, and then like reality starts, like with, committee deadlines and targets and caps and new forecasts. So, those things can all happen. It's just so hard for me to envision that if you had that kind of money that, one project will get $160 million in cash.
Sure.
And just because politically, if you can get the minority to vote for it, it's like, do you want to buy the house in cash or you want to have a mortgage? You can do a lot more projects. So, I think and I guess maybe Colin, I can't remember if you mentioned Representative Damath. I mean, these new leaders and Mark Johnson and Damath, maybe you want to talk about them. They seem pretty open to some bipartisan stuff. I don't know your thoughts on how they'll function as leaders. They're not as entrenched as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I do think Senator Johnson and Representative Damath, the new House Minority Leader, I don't think you're going to see as many log jams. But as Ann pointed out, I mean, a request of that size is probably unlikely because of how many hands are going to be out. And it is, while it is a massive surplus, it is one-time money. And so I think that'll be the obstacle. And whether or not the governor's willing to push for it and the department's ready for it. I will clarify on bonding. I do think it would be a monumental failure, and I don't think it's it's possible. I just think it's very remote that they don't accomplish a bonding bill in the next 2 years. Just a matter of whether they do one both years or one this year or they do one next year. But as it relates to the other project, I think, because of your delegation, and if they're all on board and helping and pushing, and I believe they will be, that project is in great shape. It's just whether it's going to be this year or next year.
Yeah.
Well, we have had prior conversations about various pots of money funding the landfill cleanup, not just a single bucket, a single bond, or a single cash, and how that affects various parcels that make up both the landfill and the dump for when that day comes. And so maybe there's a path for some redevelopment in some land that's going to be encumbered for nearly 40 years. Parts of that land is probably okay to be encumbered in that way, right? But other parts closer to the highway, closer to 13 or the south side, we might want to develop sooner than later. But ultimately, that we're sort of talking about something that has got a long way to go. Funding is one thing. Getting it done with the current landowner, overcoming those issues, is a whole separate thing. But the thing I like about it is one-time money. The big $9 billion plus is one-time money, and so one-time projects is where I would like to see it spent, as opposed to putting in structural increases that can't be sustained over time. One of the biggest mistakes that major statewide transportation entities does is expand service without the funding to maintain it over time. They get large amount of money, they expand all their service area, and they actually don't have the funding to maintain it, to fund depreciation, to maintain and operate it for more than maybe a year or two, and then they're running massive deficits. And when they get more money, they just add more area, more service, instead of funding what they already have. And they're digging themselves in a deeper and deeper hole. So that's just one example of structural budget versus one-time money projects. We're only going to clean it up once. It has one price tag and one process to clean it up, and it's done. So we'll see. But thanks, I appreciate your perspective.
So, Madam Mayor, members of the council, that's the proposed agenda staff puts in front of you. We'd ask for your support in that or any feedback on any changes, and then we'll finalize it and bring it back for the December work session.
Okay. You're good with it? Okay. Councilmember Keeley? Yeah.
Good. There's probably more things that we could talk about.
Yeah.
But we have a supporting list or another list that we could share with you, if any of these are running into some rough resistance, we have other things that we can go after. We really try to, being here as long as I have, I've seen the list go from multiple pages, and like here, we'd like all 30 things done, which didn't make any sense, and I think I was part of the push to condense it into, let's give them 3 things that we can find some victories with. And when it's only those things, and you don't have any of the others in the list at all, it almost seems like we've swung too far. We've given you a very small list, and the dynamics of the legislature could, as you've both pointed out, or all 3 have pointed out, could affect the success or failure of how you approach these, or whether these will even get anywhere. And so there's other things that we could pivot to, as you mentioned earlier, Ann, if we need to.
I think-
An observation
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Have you gotten a temperament on our delegation as far as digging line versus digging hall for the freeway landfill? And what preferences are where they might end up siding with based on, you know, the MPCA being a
Yeah, I mean, I
Feature
think
of the
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Workman, they've only shown us repeatedly that they want to do what you guys
Yeah.
need. We've yet to see them
Yeah.
sort of, I mean,
That's what I
certainly,
have
if they're
gotten
gonna, at some point, they're gonna hit some issue ethically or principally that they're gonna disagree with you on, but we have seen no sign of that yet. They are always ready to say, to tell us, you know, tell us what the city of Burnsville needs. They're very eager, and I think when you see them, they will be eager once again.
Yeah.
I don't think they've really had to confront that issue, right? If the MPCA starts internally saying, hey, Senator Port, or hey, Senator Carlson, or hey, Representative Hansen, like, we're against your council on this, you know, I would be stunned if they don't stick with you.
Yeah.
I think you've made the compelling case to them repeatedly, and I know you guys have strong relationships with them. So, I can't speak for them. I don't know that, but I would be very surprised
Yeah.
that they would not want to do what you all are asking of them as it relates to this, as, you know, the experts, the city who's dealing with the host community, they know you've been working on it for a really long time. So it's gone very smoothly. You're definitely losing a little seniority in, you know, that Representative Mason understood it more and spent more time on it. But that's okay, and that's all gonna change, and, we've seen Representative Berg and Representative Hansen and Representative Ryer just, you know, ready to go, and of course, Senator Port is already getting everything drafted right now. We're working through her office. We got permission to begin the drafting process, which is getting back to Manager Lindberg to get the language the way we want it, and then we're gonna ask the delegation, if you all approve this, to introduce these bills.
Yeah, no, that's my relationship and also conversations with them. They're very much in support of the things that we have. And they've talked about, you know, tell us what you need. So
I just
I've
hope
not-
when PCA comes forward with a recommendation that, in my words, my assumptions, that are ultimately going to be dig in line, that they'll stick by us.
Yeah.
Because I'm not hopeful that PCA is going to go for dig and haul. So I hope.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's all about collaborating and looking at what's good for the city.
Agreed.
And I think that's part of the conversation that we get to with all of that. And I agree with Ann, because that's my conversations with them. So I don't know where the PCA is gonna come down with, but I think they'll put the money, they'll say, this is what it's gonna cost. So if it's going to go to a bonding, you know, then now it's up to the governor whether he wants to put that.
And
amount.
Madam Mayor, if I may, and Councilmember Workman, just a thought here, if that happens, right, if we just see that, look, this is what MPSA is, saying, we have to get in with your delegation right away, and that's a good time to use all of you, to really have you make those personal calls to them and say, I understand you're getting pressure from the governor, the agency, that they can do it for less with this other way, but here's the reasons we really need you to stick with us, and, you know, you being part of speaking to them, I think will make a big difference too, but
Yeah.
so far, you know, we haven't hit that point, and if we do, then we have to strategize around it and solve it.
I think that, Mayor and Council, I think that's a great point that Ann makes, that we want to be strategic
Yeah.
about how we bring these issues, not only in front of the delegation, but how we're talking about these issues. And again, following Ann and her team's lead will be helpful in that as we interact with our delegation on these important issues, and as we strategically need to encourage you all to have conversations as well.
Yeah, and my comments about, I think what our staff has put together for us to focus on, it's about focusing and intentionally working towards the accomplishment and delivery of these items. Because before, when you had so much, then what are you working on? And so many things pop up at the legislature, and are you going to focus on the message and the stories that we tell, or are we going to say, well, oh yeah, that's good today, let's go after that, and we don't get the results that we want. So for me, I appreciate what staff has done, being intentional, focusing on the things that are most important to us, so that we can get some wins, and that's what this is about, is to get wins for Burnsville on all of this. So, I think you have a unanimous, it doesn't have to be consensus, it's unanimous, this is what we're going with, staff, so.
Great. Thanks, Madam Mayor and Council. We appreciate your time and input, and we look forward to coming back in December and presenting this to the state delegation for Burnsville.
Yeah. And then, Ann, you guide us as to what you want us to do. You just said, make those phone calls to our delegation. So I would say to our staff, make sure you have our talking points so we're all singing off the same hymnal.
I think that's a great point, Mayor. Absolutely. Again, it's important to me that we're strategic about this, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're all elected officials and have connections with our delegation. I totally understand that. And my encouragement and my commitment to you all is we will have those talking points, and strategically we'll be asking you to interact, but also work alongside staff and our partners at LGN as we try to manage and best strategize how we accomplish your priorities.
Because I do remember, Ann, how we got the Minnesota River Quadrant done.
I do too.
And she was chair of the tax committee. And that took about a couple of rows, but we got it done.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and it's all about relationships, and it's all about making those connections and phone calls and meetings, and I have to thank you for coming to Burnsville, having breakfast with me and talking about all of those things after the first year that we didn't go through, and then we got it done the second year. But, and for Margaret Kelleher also at the time, texting you, get this done for Will and the mayor.
Madam Mayor, I forgot to say this, Angie on the team, one of your lobbyists, really wanted to be here. She has a little baby that's sick tonight. Got the call from the daycare that running a temp, and even though he had his flu shot, I guess he tested positive for influenza A.
Yeah.
So she's home with her little baby, so she really wanted to be here, and she, of course, is a super important asset to us working on Burnsville's work. And one final thing is, while your delegation is one party at the moment, every legislator counts to us, and that's why we are a bipartisan team. We need the minority party to understand these issues, to not oppose them, and so, all the folks at the Capitol, it is that the Democrats took, by a hair, the majority, but we need everybody, we need all four caucuses to understand what we're doing, and that's how the approach we take in talking to them, so. we look
Please
forward to it.
extend our gratitude for the work that she does with you both. And I'm sorry about her baby. I hope her baby recovers well. So, yeah.
I would also share, Mayor, that the partnership with Ann and her team and LGN has been invaluable to us, and I appreciate your support in continuing that partnership. We have real opportunities, and we're going to accomplish great things, and it's because of them. So.
Yeah, and thank you, because I know Ann and Cullen personally. Worked on a whole lot of stuff together, always in a bipartisan way, right, Cullen?
That's right.
So, with that, if there's nothing else from council and staff, we stand adjourned, and thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
This number might have to- or sounds like it's.